Welcome everyone to another coffee tasting. This week we are tasting the Guatemala Antigua by Starbucks. With this particular coffee, we're going to get notes of cocoa and subtle spice. For those of you guys joining me for the first time, we like to brew our coffee three different ways. And the reason why we brew our coffee three different ways is to really get the different flavor notes from the different brewing methods, but from the same brew of coffee. And so the reason why we do this is because when you brew it over a Chemex versus pour over and French press, we're going to get different flavor notes. We're going to get some more sediments and more oils in different brew processes. And so that's what we really like to do on this channel, is really explore. So if you guys are joining for the first time, welcome. If you guys are returning, welcome back. If you guys haven't hit that like and subscribe button down below, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. That really helps me make this channel that much better so I can continue to do these videos. Alright, so let's go ahead and get this coffee started brewing. So with this particular coffee, this is actually one of my favorite medium roast coffees. And the reason why it's one of my favorite medium roast coffees is because it's got that smooth cocoa flavor. And that's what I look for when I brew my coffee, is those cocoa flavors. And this one has a little bit of that subtle spice, but that subtle spice isn't too intense like you would get in like the Yukon blend, where that spice really comes forward. Not necessarily my favorite, but that spice is to give it that like roasty feeling, to give you a little bit of warmth. And it's just like a psychological feeling of warmth even when your coffee gets cold. So I tend to go for more of those milk chocolate flavors just because they're a little bit more smoother. So a lot of people ask me like what the best brew process there is, and I don't necessarily think there is a better brew process. It's depending on the flavor of the coffee that you're looking for. So if you're looking for like a bold cup of coffee that's going to be really heavy, you want to go for like the French press. But if you're looking for something a little bit more smoother, maybe a little bit more brighter notes, you want to go with the pour over. But if you're looking for a really light cup of coffee that tastes very clean, the Chemex is definitely really good for that one, because you're filtering out a lot of those sediments and a lot of those oils, so you're ending up with a very clean cup of coffee by the end of the brew. Normally, my favorite brews that I like to brew my coffee is with the French press, and then sometimes the pour over, depending on what coffees I'm brewing. So if we're doing like a straight up Latin American coffee, I do like to do the pour over, because the pour over helps bring out some of those bright flavors. But with the Ethiopian coffees, or say Indonesian coffees, I tend to lean more towards like the French press, because with the French press we get a lot more of those bitter flavors coming forward, and it's going to make the cup a little bit more balanced, and we see a little bit less of those bright roasty flavors. Because with like the Indonesian cup of coffee, those bright roasty flavors end up driving the cup of coffee, and that's pretty much all you taste. And I tend to go for more of those bitter flavors, those chocolate flavors that really give it that smooth flavor. And so that's why I tend to lean more towards the French press, because we see more of those bitter flavors. But with the French press, it can be very heavy in sediment and oils, so it can impact your stomach a lot. So if you do have a sensitive stomach in terms of when you drink coffee, the Chemex or the pour over would definitely be a better option. And the Chemex is the best option if you have a sensitive stomach to the oils and sediments, because the Chemex, we're getting very little amount of the oils and sediments in there. And that's why it ends up being such a smooth cup of coffee. So when you start the pour over or the Chemex, you kind of want to just pour a little bit of water on the top, and then you want to let it bloom. And what letting it bloom is you let all the air in the grinds rise to the top so that it has a way to escape. Because if you pour all the water on top immediately, the air bubbles get trapped at the bottom of the grinds, and it actually slows down the brew process. And when that happens, you're actually over brewing your coffee, and you'll end up with a bitter cup. So you might end up having a good cup of coffee, but it might have been brewed wrong because it didn't bloom or was over brewed. And so it came out a lot more bitter than it was supposed to. And so making sure that you get the proper grind, the proper portions, and fresh water is very important. And making sure that you pour the water right to make sure that we get that proper brew time so we're not over brewing or under brewing our coffee. And with these, with the different brew process that we have here, they're all gonna have the same amount of caffeine. It's just different portions of water and then different strengths of flavor. So with the French press, we're getting more sediment, so it's gonna have a bolder flavor to it. It's not necessarily gonna have more caffeine. And with the pour over, we're gonna have a lighter flavor, and it's gonna have the same amount of caffeine too. The only thing difference is the amount of liquid and the amount of cups that we're drinking. So with the pour over, we're gonna get pretty much two 16-ounce cups. With the Chemex, we're gonna get about 16 and a half, about 23 ounces of liquid, and then with the pour over, we're just gonna get a straight up 16-ounce cup of coffee. And so with this, the French press might have more coffee if you drink the whole thing, but it's gonna be 2 cups of pour over coffee. And so yes, it does have more caffeine, but there's also more cups of coffee to the brew process as well. So that's one of the differences. So if you were to drink just 1 cup of this versus the 16-ounce cup of the pour over, we're getting the same amount of caffeine per cup. We're just getting different flavors in the cup. And that's important because the different flavors and knowing the different flavors and how to extract those flavors from the cup of coffee via brewing method is important to making sure that you can enjoy the cup of coffee the way you like to drink your cup of coffee. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and start off with the pour over. So when we do our coffee tastings, it's a 3-step process. So one of the first steps that we like to do is we like to really smell the cup of coffee to really get those aromas. So with the pour over, we're definitely getting those hints of cocoa, but we're also getting those subtle hints of spice as well. And those subtle hints of spice, for those of you guys who don't really know the coffee that well, those are those bright flavors that we're smelling that's coming off the coffee. It's almost got like a citrusy smell to it, but when you taste the coffee, it's gonna have like a bright, spicy flavor. So immediately right off the bat when I sip the pour over coffee, we're getting those spicy flavors. And like, again, it's those bright citrusy flavors on the side that almost give it like a spice. And then also what we're getting with the leftover palate is almost like a dry mouth feeling. So it's going to be really good to pair this coffee with something savory because we're left with that dry mouth on the sides of our tongue. We are getting that subtle chocolate flavor that's coming out in this particular cup of coffee, but the spice notes are definitely like taking control of this cup and driving this cup of coffee. All right.
How long have you been out here since COVID?
So now we're going to taste the Chemex. And with the Chemex, we're going to get much lighter notes. We're going to get much more of those chocolate notes. It's going to be a much cleaner cup of coffee versus the pour over.
This is my first time out since COVID. I was here almost a year ago.
So immediately right off the bat, when I smell the coffee, I'm smelling a lot less of those bright citrusy spicy notes that's coming off on the pour over, and we're getting a lot more of those cocoa notes coming off of the aroma of the cup. So I'm definitely gonna like this cup of coffee much more, and it's gonna be much more smoother. The reason why this cup of coffee is gonna be much more smoother, you guys, is because the grind is a little bit more coarser, so there's less surface area to the coffee, and then also the paper filter is a triple paper filter, so we're filtering out more of those sediments and a lot more of those oils in the coffee, so it's gonna end up being a cleaner cup of coffee. So that's why it's much more smoother in flavor. Has the same amount of caffeine, just not as intense in the flavor. So with the Chemex, we're definitely getting a lot more of those cocoa notes. We still get a little bit of that subtle spice, but it's definitely not as intense as it was on the pour over. Another thing with the Chemex too is with those subtle spice notes, we're not getting that dry mouth feeling like we did with the pour over. So with the pour over, we get that dry mouth feeling because the subtle spice notes are so intense on the sides of our tongue. With the Chemex, it's so much more smoother that we don't get that dry mouth feeling, which is a lot nicer because then you don't have to pair it with something savory to really make your mouth water to combat that dry mouth feeling.
What kind of massage does he do?
All right, so now we are going to taste the French press. The French press should be done brewing right now. So with the French press, we're going to see a lot more of those sediments and a lot more of those oils make its way into the coffee. And because we're getting a lot more of those sediments and a lot more of those oils, we are going to have a much bolder cup of coffee. It's going to be similar to the pour over, except with the sediments that we're getting in the French press, it's going to really bring forward those bitter cocoa notes and kind of meet the bright spicy notes. So the bright spicy notes are going to be just as intense as the pour over coffee, but it's not going to taste as intense because those bitter cocoa notes come up more to really meet those bright spicy notes. So with those bright spicy notes and those bitter notes, they kind of balance the cup of coffee out. So that's what we're going to see on the French press right here. So we're going to go ahead and sip our cup of coffee. And so with the French press, it's similar to the Chemex in terms of balance, but it's going to have a much more intense flavor. So immediately right off the smell, we're getting a lot more of those bitter cocoa notes coming off, but we still smell those bright spicy notes coming through as well. But right now, it's predominantly those bitter cocoa notes that I'm really smelling off the French press.
Listen to one of my and look at this, it's ridiculous. I don't like this at all. I'm not going to relax listen to my own voice. So I started listening to Sam Harris's radio, which is
So that is a really full body cup of coffee, especially on the French press, because we're getting those nice bold cocoa notes paired with those bright spicy notes. It's a very balanced cup of coffee. It's nice and roasty. It's not too intense. And one of my favorite parts about drinking this on the French press is we still have those strong spicy notes, but it's not leaving that dry mouth feeling. And that's one of the things that I least like about some of those herbal spicy coffees is that dry mouth feeling that it leaves, because it kind of forces you to pair your coffee with something savory to combat that dry mouth feeling. And sometimes you might find yourself in a scenario where you don't have anything you can pair it with, so you're just inconvenienced with that dry mouth flavor on your tongue. So with this particular cup of coffee, I would definitely avoid the pour over because of that dry mouth feeling. The Chemex is really good because we get that smooth, clean cup of coffee flavor with those nice bitter notes. And with the French press, it's a nice, bold, medium cup of coffee, really well balanced because we get those cocoa notes that really meet those spicy citrus flavors that you really get at the beginning of the cup of coffee. And because those spicy notes are still there and we get those bolder bitter notes, it makes for that balanced cup of coffee. The spicy notes aren't overpowering the bitter notes, and the bitter notes aren't overpowering the spicy notes. So it's a very smooth, dark cup of coffee. I definitely recommend the French press. If you like that more flavorful cup of coffee. If you like that smoother cup of coffee, but you want that balanced cup, I would definitely go with the Chemex. And then also, if you have a sensitive stomach, I would go with the Chemex just because you're getting less oils and less sediment in your cup of coffee, making it easier on your stomach to drink. All right, so now that we've tasted a little bit of the Guatemala Antigua, we are now going to talk a little bit about Guatemala Antigua itself, its demographic, and then how it got there. So, coffee made its way to the Guatemala region in the early 1700s. But because of the economic situation in that region, the coffee farmers didn't thrive. They didn't have enough money to really invest in coffee crops. With the current crops that they already had going, converting to the new crops was just too costly. They didn't have enough money to really invest. So it wasn't until the mid 1900s, late 1900s is when coffee really started booming. And then you have, when the 1980s, you really have a strong demand for coffee. And then you have Guatemala, Antigua that comes out, and we have ethical sourcing of coffee and the higher demand of coffee, allowing for coffee farmers in this region to really grow more coffee and make the money that they need to sustain themselves and invest in more land to grow more coffee. And that's important because to learn these stories is really cool, because coffee has really helped people in different parts of the world bounce back from poverty, especially when it comes from economic reasons. Like when you do like Guatemala, you have the different crops that start to dwindle and not becoming a high demand because people start growing different crops in different parts of the world because it becomes easily accessible. So their demand for the native crops in this part of the world start to sell less, and so these farmers are making less money. And so when the farmers in this part of the world start growing coffee, it's more or less a way for them to bounce back from the economic strife that they're going through. And then in this part of the world, we have a lot of uh, unfair treatment going on with a lot of the workers. And so when we start seeing ethical sourcing and ethical farming going on with making sure that we are properly paying our farmers, these farmers in Guatemala are starting to see a more fair wage and actually starting to be able to provide for their families and continue to grow coffee ethically and not have to do extra work or overwork themselves to sustain themselves. So that's very important, and to be able to learn these stories about our cups of coffee and how they impact people on the other parts of the world can just make that much more of an impact on the cup of coffee we drink, because every time you drink a cup of Guatemala, you know that you're helping people in a part of the world where fair wages weren't a thing. And because of ethically sourced coffee and making sure that we're 100% being for the people, that these people in Latin America can sustain for themselves and grow and become a better culture in the area that they are. And then this Guatemala Antigua coffee, it's an exceptional cup of coffee. And what makes it an exceptional cup of coffee is its location. So its location is actually in a valley nestled between three volcanoes. And so because we have those three volcanoes, it's going to have very rich volcanic soil, and it's got lush forests as well. And with those lush forests, we're going to really get that the nitrogen-rich fauna that feeds the soil. And because we have that nutritious, rich soil, we're creating the perfect environment to grow a flavorful cup of coffee that has all the nutrients required to bring out those robust flavors required to grow a good Arabica bean. And so that's what makes this cup of coffee so good, is the fact that we have volcanic soil and lush fauna providing nitrogen into the soil to give the coffee the nutrients it needs to grow and have all the flavors. And then the amount of work that goes into growing this coffee, it takes a lot of work because it's grown on the sides of hills. You have a lot of hill climbing. It goes into a lot of work of, like, having to maintain all the different coffee plants in this region because of the slopes that it's grown on, make it very difficult to maneuver the terrain. And so just walking the farm takes a lot of work because you have to climb a lot of hills, go up and down, move across a lot of land. And so just the amount of work that goes into harvesting these crops and maintaining these crops daily is just it's just a testament to how much work goes into growing this coffee and making sure that we can have a gourmet cup. If you guys have any questions about this particular cup of coffee, the Guatemala Antigua, or if you guys have a favorite blend that you guys like to drink, go ahead and throw that down in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what your guys' favorite cup of coffee is, and maybe I can feature your cup of coffee here on this channel. Yeah, so, and then if you guys have a favorite brewing method that I'm not doing here on this channel, go ahead and throw that brewing method down below. Maybe I can explore that brewing method and learn a little bit myself about coffee, just because I haven't explored all the different brewing methods are out there. So if you have a brewing method that I'm not doing on this channel that you guys would like to see me do, go ahead and throw that down in the chat too. I'd love to explore the different areas of coffee that I have not explored. Yeah, so if you guys enjoyed today's coffee tasting, join me this Tuesday as we explore a special coffee that's dedicated to supplying jobs to man. Oh, man, I forget what it's. If you guys enjoyed today's coffee tasting, join me this Tuesday as we explore a new coffee that one of my coworkers gave me. And this particular coffee is dedicated to supplying jobs to people with autism and disabilities. So we're going to explore a little bit about that. Super awesome. The fact that this company is able to supply jobs to people with autism and disabilities and produce a work environment that they can work in and become baristas themselves and serve coffee and even learn latte art. So I just want you guys to join me this Tuesday as we pay tribute to this particular coffee company and supplying jobs to people with autism and disabilities. Thanks again for joining me. I will see you guys this Tuesday. Have a great day.